this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very, very much appreciated all the comments. I love reading your feedback, and yeah, it's like I said all the time, it's very much appreciated, and I honestly mean that. If it wasn't for you guys watching the show and sort of, you know, liking it and all that kind of stuff, I'd be sat here talking to myself. So yeah, it's very cool, and I really appreciate it. So on to this week's episode of the show. Time to look at some distillery bottling, as I've done independent bottlings for a couple of episodes now, and as you can see from the title page, we're looking at the Isle of Raasay distillery that I've grown quite fond of since I first tasted it back in February of 2021, and you can check out that episode of the show, episode 401 to be precise, and it was a mammoth one because the distillery kindly sent me the 6 component parts of their sort of core single malt and the finished product. And I think this is one of the sort of really interesting things about not just Rassay but sort of modern distilleries as a whole. The landscape has become quite crowded. You know, there's a lot of new distilleries have cropped up in the last 10 years, and to coin one of those horrible marketing monkey terminologies, distilleries now need a U.S.P. It's not enough just to basically produce a great whiskey and say, look, here's our great whiskey. They need this kind of U.S.P. to sort of, you know, grab would-be sort of buyers' attention and things like that. And a lot of it is born out of a kind of, I suppose, the what-if question. I mean, I know a lot of you will kind of roll your eyes with the mention of whiskey and terroir, but yeah, it started a conversation, and it's not just about that. It's looking at different types of yeast, oak, all this kind of stuff, different sort of distillation methods, and it's gone beyond just sort of like I said, making a good whiskey, because it's not. It's not interesting enough anymore. You know, we've become a lot more geeky, and we've become a lot more interested in the actual production methods and the whys and the wherefores, and certainly Rassay have been at the forefront of that with regards to their looking at oak. Now, along with that, the distillery want to be as open and transparent as possible, and Alistair Day, the sort of master blender, wants you to get inside his head. You know, that might be a bit of a scary thought. And well, certainly with regards to sort of like why he's doing what he's doing, and they're kind of, to a certain extent, to coin another horrible marketing phrase, taking you on a journey. Oh my God, I should sign up for a course in marketing monkey speak. No, so basically it's kind of, and this is part of this week's episode of the show, like I said, sort of the Rassay have kind of focused on not just oak in a kind of a broad sense of the word. I mean, you know, we're all guilty of thinking of oak in a relatively kind of black and white perspective. It's either American oak or it's European oak, you know, that's because to a certain extent that's all we're told, you know, but when you think about it, there's a lot of different species of oak. It's not just European oak, you know, you have sort of, you know, French oak and Hungarian oak and so on and so forth, and Rassay want you to understand what that different species of oak has on their spirit, and to that end they have released this rather attractive 4 sample tasting pack. I mean, look, it's even got a little cutout of the island. I mean, that is just so cool. I mean, that has cost some money and some time and some thought, and this is one of the things I love about the distillery. And so what we have here is we have, you know, all things being equal, so that all the spirit that's in these 4 samples has been distilled in February of 2021, bottled in March of 2025, produced in exactly the same way. The only difference is the cask that it's been aged in. So here we will get the opportunity to sort of, like I say, peek into the sort of what these different oak species have what they do to the spirit, and it's just sort of the sort of thing that you just don't get the opportunity to do. But like I said, a lot of the modern distilleries are looking at things from this angle and want you to be part of it, and that's part of their appeal and a part of why these distilleries have become so popular in such a relatively short period of time, is that they want you to sort of buy into what they're doing. It's like I said, it's not enough just to make sort of good whiskey anymore. You have to sort of you have to sell yourself, I suppose, to a certain extent. So so I've got the 4 samples here. I've also got a brand spanking new release from the distillery, which I thought I would include in today's episode of the show. So big thank you to the distillery for that particular sample. Obviously the other samples I've purchased one of the tasting packs, so they are readily available to purchase from pretty much all good whiskey shops. Can't speak. Shops. So if you like the sound of this, and I really do think you should sort of, if you love whiskey and you love experimentation, then get hold of one. But anyway, probably getting ahead of myself a little bit there, so not a great deal else to say. I've waffled an awful lot, so let's just take a look at today's one. So, as I previously said, the spirit is exactly the same age, just over 4 years, bottled at the same ABV as well, 50.7. So we're going to kick off with, and it's all peated spirit as well. Whoa, fun. As you know, they do peated and unpeated spirit, but for this particular set of releases, they've stuck with the peated spirit. So this is the spirit that's been aged in Quercus. Oh no, lots of Latin names here, which I'm going to screw up, but so you'll have to live with me on this one. Humboldtil, I think, is the Quercus Humboldtil, or otherwise known as Colombian oak. So virgin Colombian oak to start off with. The second one we're going to be looking at is Quercus Petraea. I think that's how that one is pronounced, otherwise known as virgin Hungarian oak. Number 3 is good old Quercus Robur, so virgin French oak. And the last of the 4 is called, I'm going to try and get my tongue around this one, Quercus Muehlenbergii. Yep, really, which is apparently their good old virgin Chinkapink American oak, which they seem to enjoy using. And the brand spanking new release is actually sort of shows that they're looking at things other than just the oak. This is looking at sort of barley, and in actual fact it's a collaboration with the Arbikie distillery, and this is an unpeated spirit made with concerto barley, which has been grown at Arbikie, and they've shipped over to Rassay. There's an interesting blog post on the Rassay website about the sort of trials and tribulations of pulling off this particular release, and it has been aged in ex-Woodford Reserve's rye whisky casks for just under 6 years and bottled at 50.2%, so I think that'll be an interesting one to take a look at. I know it's unpeated and it's coming after the peated spirit, so probably not the correct way round of doing this tasting, but you'll kind of have to bear with me on that one, and hopefully it won't sort of spoil the episode of the show. But anyway, let's kick off with a little bit of Quercus Humboldtil then. Okay, so let's take a look at what the Colombian oak does to the spirit. I shall be having a good sniff of that, shall we say. Oh. It's quite dark, it's quite tight actually. Now there has been a sort of proliferation of Andean oak or Colombian oak casks appearing on the market. Various distilleries seem to have used some blends as well, and I've noticed they tend to be a lot of vanilla, a lot of creaminess, whereas this particular one doesn't seem to have it. It's not got that creaminess. It's an actual more dark fruit. It's got this sort of like the dark peat, some edgy spirit. It is quite youthful. There's a little bit of vanilla. It's quite spicy, dry, dry, dark spice. Try saying that after you've had a few, and I haven't. There's some nice sweetness coming through underneath there. There's a little bit of a kind of almost kind of apricot conserve and sort of honey, but it is really spicy and quite tight, and I'm quite surprised at how tight the nose actually is, but interesting. See what the pass like. Like the nose, it's not adding an awful lot of vanilla, a lot of that sort of character you expect. It's kind of quite, not neutral is the wrong word, because it's obviously adding some really dark and slightly bitter spices. There's more cereal, there's quite a lot of malt, there's a lot of distillery character in actual fact. Getting sort of tobacco leaf, a little bit of macerated fruit. Yeah, it's kind of intriguing. It's, like I said, it's not what I was expecting from Colombian oak at all. It seems to be sort of it's added a sort of a darkness and a spiciness, but it's not added an awful lot of vanillins. And I guess this, here we are with the sort of like, you know, the interesting interplay between the oak and the spirit, and how a blender such as Alistair would sort of put together a blend by sort of saying, right, okay, this is giving me this kind of character, and yeah, fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Let's see what a little drop of water does. Right, well, it's pushing the oak back quite considerably, and you often tend to find that with spirits, when you put a little drop, or whiskey, when you put a little drop of water with it, it will push back the oak, and I'm getting sort of less dark, tobacco-y, leathery-ish kind of notes, and it's more about the sort of coastal, salty apricot, a little bit of vanilla now coming out. It's a little bit softer, and the peat is more noticeable. It's got an almost kind of herbal astringency to it. So yeah, it does seem to sort of be that the oak is adding this kind of darker sort of spiciness, as opposed to sort of vanillins. Let's see what the that's like. Yeah, a lot more sweeter barley now. It's got that subtly sweet honeyed kind of note. Again, a little bit of dry peat, dry peat, not dusty. So, yeah, a bit of tannins, still a bit of tightness, a little bit of tobacco, a little bit of spice. But again, that's all been lessened, and it's now front and centre spirit. And like I said, the oak is just adding that little bit of spice. So really intriguing, really interesting, and certainly not what I was expecting from Colombian oak, it has to be said. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Quercus Petraea, otherwise known as Hungarian oak. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Now, if you thought that Colombian oak was a bit on the tight side, this is even tighter. Really savoury. I'm getting bovril, dry peat, dry spices, smoke. Bovril, it just smells of bovril. I hate bovril, it has to be said. Ugh, horrible stuff. But like bloody Marmite. Ugh, why do people like Marmite? I just don't understand. Anyway, so again, Hungarian oak, quite tight. The grain, the oak grains, or the are quite tight, so you're not getting so much vanilla, you're not getting the spirit sort of, or the whiskey kind of being absorbed quite so quickly as say something like American oak, which has wider grains, wider pores if you like. There's a little bit of citrus, some dark marzipan, and I'm not getting a lot of spirit character, it has to be said. So the oak is actually adding quite an awful lot of character, but it's not adding a sort of, again, the vanillins, it's adding a more sort of savoury spice kind of character. It's quite interesting, it has to be said. Let's see what pass on. again, tighter than a gnat's chuff, it has to be said. So as we know, the oak doesn't just add the vanilla character, it doesn't add sort of substances to the spirit, it actually removes substances. And when an oak isn't as porous, it's not going to remove some of those impurities as quickly. And it's very noticeable that this spirit has a little bit of an off the still note still. It's got a very youthful character. It's just not, removed enough of the sort of the impurities. Again, it's quite spicy, dry spice, dark spices. That slight savouriness there as well, but it's not particularly integrated, and it just appears to me from tasting this that if you are aging in Hungarian oak, yep, use it as a component, fine, you're going to get that slight savouriness coming through, but ideally it needs to spend more than 4 years in the cask. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what happens to the nose. Not a great deal of difference. In actual fact, it's possibly made it more off the stilly, more sort of youthful, more spirity. And again, you wouldn't want to bottle this as a full bottling, it has to be said. Certainly not at this kind of age. And this is just so interesting. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that normally sort of master blenders would have on their shelves, and nobody would ever see this kind of stuff, because no distillery generally wants to release a product that's not ready. And I guess sort of master blenders are quite secretive kind of characters. They want to keep their recipes to themselves, but obviously, in this instance, Alistair and the team want to kind of like show you what their spirit, how the effect of their spirit is with this different type of oak. Anyway, let's see what pass on it. Very much like the nose, very youthful, oily, a little bit of a sort of an off the still kind of note coming through as well. Slightly fusel possibly, and I'm not saying this in a sort of like a bad way, it's just an observation that obviously the oak is not kind of, because it's not so porous, it's not kind of removed as much of the impurities at this age, but it's added this lovely kind of intriguing savoury character. So yeah, that's just really intriguing. Okay, so let's move on to the Quercus Robur, the French oak. Let's see what the nose gives on this. Now that has a tightness, but a different type of tightness, and I love French oak and whiskies matured in French oak, because it has this kind of very Gallic kind of character, I suppose. It's got an almost wininess, subtle red fruits, apricot, little tight vanilla, brandy butter, smoke, tar. This is probably the most balanced of the three so far. It is absolutely gorgeous. You could have bottled this now, 4 years old, French oak, really, really intriguing. And it's kind of, it has the tightness, but it has the looseness at the same time. I suppose probably the French would kind of agree with that. And it's got some evolution, but it's also kind of emphasised the tarriness, and the peat is more front and centre. And I love it. I think this nose is absolutely gorgeous. I love that astringent note as well. It's nicely balanced. It's enough kind of like vanillins to not be obvious, but to sort of add a kind of a nice bedrock, a sort of a base for the spirit to sort of like show its character. So I'll pass on that. Juicy. The tightness of the tannins is kind of sort of like well integrated with the juiciness of the malt, the fruit, the dark fruits, tobacco again, more tar, more peat, oxidised fruit, leather. That's really impressive, and you can certainly see from the samples that we are getting progressively darker in colour, even though it's only 4 years old, and that obviously would seem to imply more oak extract. It's got a really lovely balance to it, and that sort of lingering sort of tight spice kind of lingers. It's not as spicy as, say, the Hungarian oak. It's more softer, more approachable. Is that saying something about the French over the Hungarians? I honestly wouldn't like to say, but that so far I think shows the best balance of the 3 different casks at 4 years of age. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see what that does to it. Okay, so it's pushed back the oak a bit, but you're still getting the French tannins, the French oak tannins. It's a lighter now, a little bit more citrus, a little bit more salt. It's an almost kind of Riesling-esque kind of petrol-y kind of note coming through, which is obviously spirit related, one imagines. A bit of white fruit as well. Again, I think this is absolutely delightful. It's really nicely balanced. It's, you know, got real intrigue, but then all 3 of them so far have an intriguing character, I think. Let's just pass on. Sweeter, more, yeah, it's definitely got more sweeter edge, but it's not honey. It's a sort of a fruit sweetness, a sort of like a kind of almost winey sweetness. Again, there's that Riesling petrol-y kind of note coming through, which is really intriguing. And it's maybe because you think it's French oak, it's kind of leading me in that kind of direction. I think possibly, I prefer that without putting any water to it. But so far, like I said, I think of the 3 that I've tasted so far, that is the most harmonious, the most sort of like evolved, and the one that you could actually bottle right now on its own, and you'd have a lovely whiskey. So, yeah, interesting. Okay, so on to the final of the 4 oak series bottlings. This is the Muehlenbergii, or the otherwise known as the Chinkapin American oak. Let's see what the nose gives on this. Enjoy. Classic, absolute classic American oak. Lots and lots of vanilla, cream, butter, toffee. But it's got that lovely sweet spice, that sort of ginger and cinnamon and a little bit of smoked meat, a bit of peat. But it is pretty much about the oak. It's a sweet oak, the sort of, you know, one doesn't want to say brashness of the Americans, but it does kind of very much fit, shall we say, the expected American characteristics. It is very broad, it's very sort of, you know, big and juicy, and there's a little bit of maple syrup and there's some salt, and it's just a crowd pleasing nose. It's a lovely sweet oaked nose, but it's not overblown. It's not all about the oak. The spirit is definitely there. It is coming through with that little bit of peat, a little bit of salt, some fleshy fruit as well. Again, I would say it's pretty well balanced. And absolutely delightful. It really is a lovely, it's a lovely whiskey to stick your nose into, it has to be said. Anyway, let's see if it pass on. Juicy, succulent. We can see why sort of, you know, bourbons can be bottled at, you know, 6 months, you know. The oak is just sort of so wide open, it's just kind of like saying, yeah, come on in. And it's adding so much vanilla and softness and sort of caramel and toffee and all that kind of stuff, and it's really appealing. And sometimes, as we well know, sort of American whiskies are bottled far too young, and yes, you have all this kind of oak overload and no maturation of spirit. In this instance, I would say, yep, okay, it's young, the spirit is quite youthful, there's an edge there, but it kind of works. It sort of counterbalances the sweetness of the oak. There's a quite a nice dry peat finish, a little bit of gristiness as well. That I think is absolutely lovely, and you can see why the distillery love to use this type of cask, because it just works so nicely with their spirit. It is just absolutely delightful. Big, juicy, fruity. I mean, the American oak just seems to emphasise the Rassay fruitiness and the sweetness of the barley. Alright, it's a little bit more one-dimensional once you put the water with it. It kind of like, you know, it has become slightly overly oaked, I will give you that. But again, it's kind of appealing to a certain extent, but I would personally, you know, again, not really bother with the water. Let's see what the parts are. Yeah, I think the palate is a little bit better balanced. Again, quite sweet. It's removed a little bit of the edginess, a little bit of the spice. I'm getting more of that kind of fleshy, kind of corny, sort of banana-y, sort of apricot kind of fatness, I suppose. There's a little bit of dry peat coming through in the finish, and it works quite nicely with the spirit, I think. And this is obviously why the distillery are using this cask, because it just sort of it just kind of works at the end of the day. It's just really nice. So yeah. Okay, on to the final whisky of the afternoon. Like I said, this is probably doing it completely the wrong way around, starting with the peated spirit and ending with the unpeated spirit, but when do I follow convention? Let's see what that nose gives us. That's interesting. It's got a real starchiness. Now, I know that Arbikie kind of famously produced a potato vodka, and I just smell starch. I don't know where that's coming from. It's really different. So there's a little bit of barley, some apricot. It's a French oak kind of tightness there. Although it's obviously not a French oak cask, it's an American rye cask, so I can only assume it's the rye that's kind of giving it that kind of French oak tight spice kind of note. It certainly doesn't have the spiciness of the Hungarian oak, for example, but it's a bit on the young side as well. There's that rose petal, there's that it's got a vanilla, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of sort of minerality, salty minerality. It's a bit young, it has to be said. I mean, it's interesting in that, I suppose, if you'd have tasted this against the standard Rassay core release, you'd notice quite a distinct difference. And like I said, it's that starchiness that kind of stands out. So it's obvious that the sort of, again, although I suppose we're kind of moving into the sort of terroir, I guess, it just goes to show that sort of the barley that's grown in Arbikie is quite different to the barley that they normally use. I don't know whether it's locally, I don't think it is local, but let's sort of pass on. First impressions, although this is 6 years old, I think it's been bottled too young. It's still got that marry kind of youthful rose petals, slightly oily kind of character. There's some nice yellow fruits, there's some summer fruit, a little bit of barley. Again, it's got that slight starchiness to it. It's a bit short. It's interesting in, I guess, from an experimental point of view, but I really think if it was me, I would have just left this a little bit longer. I think it's, like I said, it's got too much of that youthful, off the still characteristics, that sort of rose petal, and it's, I hate to say it, I personally don't think it's quite fully integrated. It's on the way, and I personally would have, like I said, I think I would have left that a little bit longer. I'm going to put a little drop of water and see what that does to it. Right, that's kind of brought out a little bit more of the sort of vanillins, a little bit more of the American oak. It's still got that sort of, it's got some toastiness, some dry toast, dry spice, but I can still feel the rawness of the spirit, and it just feels like it's just not ready yet. Now, as much as I love Rassay and I love what they're doing, I just think that this has been bottled a little bit ahead of time, personally. It just needed another couple of years, possibly even 4. And this is the thing, you know, the whiskey, for me, tells you when it's ready. And sometimes I think blenders, distillers, just kind of release stuff a little bit too soon because they want to get it out on the market. They want to show you what they've been up to. It's kind of a look, you know, this is really interesting. And sometimes maybe that kind of takes over from sort of just saying, is this really ready? Anyway, let's see what pass I am. Okay, less oak, less spice, a little bit more sweetness to the spirit, but again, it's still got that youthful edge just there at the end. I mean, okay, I think if it tasted this way neat, you'd probably go, okay, yep, I can live with that little youthful nuance on the finish. But it's less kind of intriguing, it's less starchy, less interesting once you put a little drop of water with it. And like I said, my gut feeling is that this was bottled a little bit too soon. I mean, obviously Alistair would probably completely and utterly disagree with me on that fact, but that's just my opinion. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. I personally think this has been one of the most intriguing episodes of the show I've ever done. You know, I am, without doubt, a bit of a whiskey geek. I kind of love this kind of stuff. I want distilleries and blenders to tell me what they're up to. Like I said, it's just not enough in this day and age to sort of produce a good whiskey. I mean, I'm sorry, you know. I mean, it's all well and good having a good whiskey to sup in an evening, but you know, there are more. You know, I want to know what you've been up to. I want to know the nuances, why you've done this. You know, it's kind of like, you know, you're under the spotlight, you know, Alistair, as they say at the end of the day. And I love the fact that the distillery is giving you this kind of insight, this kind of look into sort of what they're up to, why they're doing, because that's, at the end of the day, as a sort of an artist, and I do think that sort of blenders are indeed artists, and you know, having an artistic background myself, you know, you want people to look at your kind of art and at least have a reaction to it. That was I always remember having this conversation with you know, my college lecturer, about the fact that, you know, I wanted sort of people to have a reaction to the art that I created. I didn't care whether it was positive or negative. That was completely irrelevant to me. It was, I wanted it to sort of think something about it. I didn't want somebody to look at my art and go, that's all right, you know, because to me that was probably the worst thing you could do. You know, I wanted you to either love it, hate it, or whatever, you know. Anyway, so coming back to today's episode of the show. Like I said, I think with regards to the Colombian oak, the Humboldtil, not what I was expecting. It certainly doesn't come across like any of the other Colombian oak bottlings that I've tasted. It didn't really have the vanilla, the creaminess that I would normally associate with Colombian oak. And was actually quite dry, quite spicy. Interesting, a real interesting view. Has to be said. And the Hungarian oak, like I said, I mean, again, at this kind of age, obviously not something you'd want to bottle in on its own right, but it kind of added that real intriguing savouriness and that savoury spice kind of character, which is, like I said, you use that as part of a kind of a vatting, it's you know, going to add that intriguing character. The French oak, I think, was probably the most complete, if you like, the bottling that I would have released, because it just at this kind of age, again, it just had that lovely integration. It had the sort of tightness of the French oak that you would normally expect, but it had the spiciness, it had a little bit of vanilla. It was just an all-round lovely whiskey, and the most complete of the four. Obviously the American oak, the Chinkapin, was probably the most kind of crowd pleasing, but then American oak actually it is, you know that, you know, it's lots of vanilla, it's lots of big characteristics, and a big oak characteristic, and that was the point. I wouldn't quite go as far as saying it was overly oak to the point of imbalance, but it was very much American oak centric, and where it lacked some of the Gallic subtleties, shall we say. Oh, the French are going to love that. So yes, great whiskey, as we said, lovely intrigue and interesting. And the final bottling, the Arbikie barley bottling, I think it was just bottled a bit too soon, for my personal opinion. It should have done with a little bit more time, just remove a little bit more of that kind of youthful, off the still, rose petally kind of character, and I think it would have been a little bit more harmonious. But again, another interesting bottling, and I guess as a sort of distillery, if you don't kind of like try and push the boundaries and try and do these kind of interesting things, and I don't know whether any other distillery has done something like this. Certainly I've not tasted anything that's been this kind of type of collaboration, and so for that I have to sort of applaud the distillery for doing that kind of thing. Great stuff, and you know, like I would say, support the distillery, and I would buy this tasting pack, because it is, if you're kind of curious about oak and spirit and how they work together, then you really need to buy that tasting pack, because it is unique. Nobody else is doing it. You're not going to get that sort of insight from any other distillery. So yeah, hats off to Rassay for doing that. So this week's episode of the show is now finished. I hope you've enjoyed it. I think it's been really intriguing, probably one of the most intriguing and interesting episodes that I've personally done, and well, as you well know, I've done a lot of episodes of the show. So until next week, all that's left to say is good afternoon and good ramming.